Yeah.
So moving on, okay, and now we have to gasp in fear. Are you ready for the gasp in
It's
fear?
nigh.
There we go. We're gasping. That's right. We should fear this. The end is nigh because guess what? Also, the coming open source apocalypse is upon us because open source is unsecure. Does that surprise you, that statement?
No.
Do you believe it's true?
Yes.
Do you believe that it is?
Sorry, it is more nuanced than this, I think, than just it's insecure or it's not secure. I think that's kind of too basic.
Okay, but again, this is where I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. Let's talk surveys. Let's talk, these results, because most of this stuff that we see coming out is driven by a lot of interesting kind of data points, right? And so a week ago, this article, the series of articles, it was a study, that talked about open source vulnerabilities. Okay. And it's 84% of code bases have vulnerabilities. You know what? That's bullshit. 100% of code bases have vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Maybe 16% of them haven't been disclosed or found yet.
I mean, and this is where I feel like these kind of very sensationalist pieces are a bit misleading.
But there's
well, what does it?
50 articles that are based on this and that say almost the exact same thing.
Yeah, which I think is not a good thing at all, that kind of information spreads like this. But what does it even mean to be insecure or secure? Are you saying kind of from a more absolute, like here's how many ways that an attacker could attack you? Or does it mean that you're more secure than the thing, than your sibling project that solves a similar problem? It's like, well, is it relative? Is it absolute? What is the yardstick? And if the yardstick is CVEs, mixed in how reasonable that is to use.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting is the way that's written. At a time when almost all software contains open source software, at least one known open source vulnerability was detected in 84% of all commercial and proprietary code bases. Okay? So you could read this a couple of different ways. That 84% of commercial and proprietary code bases are using open source software and have those open source vulnerabilities that they inherited. Maybe they shouldn't be. And so those licensing risks if they're using things that they shouldn't be, because, they say it's in proprietary. So is this a misleading quote right off the bat or headline? Just because if it's 84% of commercial and proprietary, what about the open source side? And again, I submit that, all software has bugs and vulnerabilities. It just depends on, the exploitability of them and if they've been found yet.
Right. Yeah, I think ultimately these kinds of claims are not super meaningful generally. That's not to say that there's nothing to learn from them at all, but it's really hard to interpret that in a meaningful way without a lot more information.
Yeah. I think though, but this gets back to that survey that Linux Foundation did, where it's one of the things that people are really concerned about is the security side in open source, because
which is reasonable.
Is more insecure. I don't think it's any more insecure than the proprietary.
That's true. But however, I think it still has a lot of problems.
Oh, and of course.
So for instance, the fact that most package registries, Python, NPM, big package registries, they only started requiring two-factor auth recently, in the last year or two, that became a thing where you could have billions of downloads a week on your package, and someone could just get it. Someone could hack NPM, get into your account, and publish malware to billions of devices overnight. And that was a totally, real thing that could have happened until pretty recently. At least for those package managers. I'm sure that there are others that still don't have 2FA as a thing that you need to have. But the reach of that software is huge, right? It's huge, huge, huge. And so with things like that in mind, when people talk about the open source supply chain, it's we really, really need to lock this stuff down immediately. But things like this of how many CVEs are in a code base is I think a lot less meaningful generally.
Okay. So on the heels of this, another company came up with their list based on some, Endor Labs introduced this listing of the most impactful security risks in open source software.
Cool.
Okay. So what are they? I listed them so we can talk about them. Okay. A component version may contain vulnerable code accidentally introduced by it's bugs. Okay. The first one's bugs. Kind of a no duh, right?
Okay,
Like,
sure.
The second one is compromise of a legitimate package where attackers may inject malicious code. So now we've got the whole, we're going to push code up. We're going to put out their PR requests, merge requests that includes malicious code. A typo squatting attack, right? So,
That's just another bug, right?
a typo squatting attack, maybe. I mean, well,
No. So this isn't a typo. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Typo squatting, I think, is not even the biggest
Yeah,
risk in this category. It's the dependency confusion stuff that was announced like a year or two ago. I don't remember how long ago.
well, I think
was.
that's on the list. I think that's on the list, right? So
Separately?
yeah, separately. There's 10 of them, so this is just the first 5.
Okay.
So we've got the name confusion.
Yeah, sure. Typo squatting is a thing, but I
Yeah.
feel like it's not really nearly as big as these other ones, I think.
So what's
general.
weird is like, okay, so typo squatting is really on the end user.
Should we explain what that is for people, or do we just
I
assume
mean,
that
like,
they know
okay,
what
so
that
those
is?
who are interested, typo squatting is when you accidentally type the wrong name. So, let's say you were going to use MySQL and, you typed it MySQL or something like that, and you just missed a letter, and then it downloads a malicious package. So what's funny is I don't consider that well, you might think of it as I don't think it's a security issue. It's a training and, like it's an end user issue. I mean, it's an end user issue who the end user specifically did something that is, not right.
I mean, yes, but also the fact that there would be malware on a registry at all.
Yeah, I mean, like you can argue that, but it's not just registries here. It could be websites that you're getting it from. You could be, following along. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. But look at number 4, for instance. This is where, unmaintained software where components may unknowingly no longer be maintained or supported. That's on the end user.
Totally.
Right? I mean, again, like, so is that a security risk if an end user is just too lazy or maybe just doesn't care and just uses
I mean,
stuff
yeah.
that's old?
I think that if you think that this is a security vulnerability, then you kind of just fundamentally think that open source is not a secure model and there's nothing that can ever be done about it.
Yeah, I mean, like, and there's outdated software and then there's unmaintained software. I don't know. Like, it just seems really kind of like half-hearted to claim that those are like security risks. I mean, they can cause security vulnerabilities, but that's more of a training and a consistency and a attention to detail issue.
Yeah, I guess, there's kind of, there's multiple angles to think about security in this kind of context. And one is, how do we protect the unsophisticated open source user versus how can we,
Ooh, that's a
like,
whole
what is the
nother question.
maximum amount of, sorry?
That's a whole nother question. And like,
Right.
debate,
But like,
yeah.
I mean, I would claim that a thing like typo squatting is purely that.
With great
where-
power comes great responsibility.
Right,
Spider-Man,
right. But
right?
then there's the separate thing of, let's say that you are highly sophisticated, you care a lot about security, and you put as much resources as possible to make yourself secure. How theoretically secure can you possibly be if you're doing everything
Yeah, I mean,
right?
like, even
And
if you're
so-
doing everything right, you're still vulnerable. potentially.
Right. And so I think that, like, to me, that's the, I think that's perhaps a more interesting discussion to talk about because it, like, there's always going to be people who misuse a system or use a system in a suboptimal way. And you can always educate them to do better, but like, that's just, there's not really a way to solve that problem totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we got 5 more here. Let's see. Untracked dependencies. Okay. License and regulatory risk. Okay, so is that a security risk? License risk? I don't know. And if I go back,
I mean, it kind of is, right? Like
operational risk. I guess it's an operational risk. So it's operational risk as well. So okay, so that's fair. I guess that's an
Yeah. I would say like being roped into a legal contract that you didn't expect to be roped into. Like
Yeah.
that's you got hacked, or something similar.
Yeah, so I would buy that. Immature software. Okay, so you went and downloaded the cool new package and you're using it in production and you shouldn't have. True story. I wrote a clustering software a long time ago that did like a second layer cache for databases, and it was so alpha it wasn't funny. And somebody actually run it in production and it like destroyed their database. And they're like, oh, yeah, I totally ran it in production. And I'm like, no way. Why would you ever do that? Like, it was like total like proof of concept. And oh no, I just did it.
Yeah, and
again, end user problem.
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, I very much agree. You can say everything is insecure if you allow for misuse of the system in a certain way. Like,
all right. Yeah. So unapproved changes, undersized dependencies. All right, fair enough. Anyway, so if you want to check out that Endor report, you can take a look. We'll drop links to that type of stuff as well. And moving on. So open source makes everything better, right? And so what I want to know is, where the hell is my open source algorithm? Like last week, it was like, this is the week that we're gonna get the Twitter thing. Not that it matters. I don't think this matters at all.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, like, I think this is a marketing gimmick to try and drum up interest and keep Twitter in the news cycle.
I actually when this was like very when people were talking about this a lot on Twitter, I had a tweet that was kind of related to this, which is just that, like, ultimately the open source Twitter algorithm is one matrix multiplication.
Yeah.
Like, okay, but what does each column represent? What do these weights represent? Like, that's the secret sauce, and you having the code is meaningless because you don't have the data.
Oh, I'm not even sure you'll get the full code. You'll get the code for one thing, right? And, whatever that thing is might be meaningless in and of itself.
I mean, even if they gave us the entire repository for Twitter, it would not matter. Yeah. The data is what matters, I think.
All right, moving on.
I just
because that's I don't even want to get, but it's worth mentioning because it was supposed to be open source, but it wasn't. So
yeah, that's a bummer, but
yeah,
maybe it will be soon. I don't know.
Yeah, it was this week.